Hey, Hillary, it looks like we've got some folks on the call already, but I think we're ready on our end. Oh no, it's just a file. We're good, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Connect Plus webinar series, which is titled Win the Amenities Race, Connect Your Building with Customized Transportation Solutions. My name is Justin Schor. I'm the moderator for today's webinar, and I'm a principal with Wells & Associates, leading our TDM planning practice. My colleague, Courtney Menjivar, who you have been receiving emails from, leads our TDM operations practice and is the technical wizard behind the webinar series. For those of you that don't know, Wells & Associates is a multidisciplinary transportation firm with a mission to meet the needs of a mobile society. How we go about fulfilling that mission is with full service traffic engineering, transportation planning, transportation amenity design, installation and management, and personal travel assistance. Before we get too far into our webinar today, there are a few housekeeping items that I wanted to share with our audience. First of all, if you haven't already figured it out, you're all automatically placed into listen-only mode so that our panelists can present without disruptions. But we wanted you to know that if you have questions, you'll be able to enter them in the control panel on the right side of your screen under the chat section. We just ask that out of respect for our panelists, you hold your questions till the end of the presentations. We will have about 10 to 15 minutes after the presentations for the audience to ask our panelists questions. Another housekeeping item is that all handouts will be available for download in the control panel under the handout section. One other item is that this webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available to all registrants by close of business tomorrow. Finally, there will be a survey at the end of the webinar, and we ask that you please take a minute to fill it out so that we can learn how to make these webinars the most meaningful we can to you and other attendees at future webinars. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, I think it's time to get rolling into our webinar. And so we wanted to give a little context for this series. In case you wanted to put a face to the voice, this is me, I'm Justin. But this series asks the question, who is winning the amenities race? And for those of you that were at our first webinar, we pointed out that industry leaders feel that it's because that properties that focus on amenities, mobility, sustainability, and transportation are the places that are winning the amenities race. So our 6-part series is designed to answer who is actually providing these solutions nationwide. And we will showcase some examples of properties across the country that have figured out creative ways to position themselves ahead of the pack by connecting with customized transportation solutions. And in the process, these examples are enriching the value of their properties and assets. But today's webinar is focused on major corporations relocating their headquarters and the role that transportation plays in their relocation process. And although there's many of you, there's been a lot of buzz in the news about Amazon deciding where it will locate its second headquarters, other major organizations have long been making moves and making transportation a major factor in their decision making. So there are lessons for anybody on this webinar and other corporations moving their headquarters, and certainly Amazon if they're listening in, to learn from this panel. Our panel will examine relocation from 2 perspectives. The first is how transportation played a role in their location decision-making. Second is once the decision has been made where to locate their headquarters, how property owners used pre-move tenant relocation commute assistance to set their properties apart from the competition. So we'll start in the order that things occur, that is deciding where to locate. So our first panelist is Jim Young with Marriott International. He's going to focus on the role that transportation choices play in their decision on where to locate their new headquarters. Jim currently serves as Marriott International's Vice President of Corporate Facilities, Services, and Real Estate. He's represented Marriott's local interest in traffic, sustainability, and energy issues by working with local government and state officials. He assumes leadership for the company's sustainability initiatives at headquarters, and among numerous progressive and inventive programs, he's implemented the most significant achievement, which is their LEED existing building gold certification from the U.S. Green Building Council. Jim has an organization of 185 people that provide a safe, comfortable, and productive environment for over 3,500 associates working in over 1 million square feet at Marriott's headquarters just outside of Washington, D.C. Currently, a lot of Jim's energy and attention is focused on transforming Marriott's workplace to match the changing landscape and technology, as well as the changing workforce of the next 20 years. And in that capacity, he remains actively engaged in all facets of Marriott's plans to relocate to their new headquarters, which are going to be in Bethesda, Maryland in 2022. And it's in that context that I've had the pleasure to work with Jim and understand the real thoughtfulness with which he does his job. So it's my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Jim Young with Marriott to give that first perspective about how transportation played a role in their location decision-making. Jim?
Thank you, Justin. It's good to be with you today, and this has been quite a journey for us. We're a 90-year-old company, and for the past 39 years, we've called our corporate headquarters, which is located in sort of what's become a sleepy business park, home for over 3,000 employees. About 2 years ago, our senior leaders began considering an upcoming lease expiration on the present building that we're in. And while Mr. Marriott himself, who hates to spend money, said, well, why don't we just fix up the building and make it like new again, and we'll stay for another 20 years. Arne Sorensen, our current CEO and president, thought, well, being in this business park really doesn't give us the amenities, as Justin was talking about a minute ago, that we'd really like to have. We'd really like to be in an environment where people can walk and live and work. We are not on a metro line or a subway line here in our current location. And so we began a search that started out with dozens and dozens of locations and narrowed them down to 6 finalists. And then we, using Wells as a partner, we began an analysis of where our folks lived and how any of these potential locations might affect their commute. And so let's see if I can.
Hey, Jim, are you still there? Okay, well, I'm sure Jim will be joining us momentarily. While we wait for Jim to call back, I'll use this opportunity to introduce our second panelist. Hillary Zahm is our second panelist, and she's with Macerich. I'm just going to advance our slides a little bit so you can see Hillary's face and put the face to the name. Hillary's going to focus on a scenario that happened after a major corporation has decided where to relocate. And what's more is that it's not just relocating, but it's a location significantly different than where they were before in terms of transportation access and just type of context. Speaking from the perspective of the property owner recruiting a major tenant is what Hillary will be talking about today. As a senior manager of development for Macerich, Hillary's primary responsibilities have included coordination of future development and expansion plans for the Tysons Corner Center site and oversight of Access Tysons, which is the Transportation Demand Management or TDM program for the property. This Access Tysons TDM program has been in operation now for more than 10 years. Hillary will talk a little bit more about what Tysons Corner Center is, but for those of you that don't know it, it's a development project that is involving the transformation of an existing 2.5 million square foot regional shopping center into a mixed-use transit-oriented development that is now next to the Tysons Corner Metro Rail station, which opened up a few years back. Phase one of this project that Hillary's been overseeing opened in 2015, and it includes a 550,000 square foot office tower, 500,000 square foot residential tower, and a 250,000 square foot hotel and accessory retail uses. So it's a major, major redevelopment. And the towers are integrated with both the shopping center and the Metro Rail station to create a real live, work, play type of environment. In addition to the work that Hillary is doing in Tysons and has done in Tysons, she's involved in ongoing development property issues for Macerich throughout the country in Chicago, Moline, Illinois, and Des Moines, Iowa. Before joining Macerich, Hillary worked in a number of places, but worked as a senior urban planner with Cooley, Godward, Cronish, managing teams in the local government zoning entitlement process, including significant efforts with respect to the 2007 rezoning approval for this very Tysons Corner Center. And that's where I had the pleasure to first meet Hillary, and have since seen how committed and passionate she really is about TDM for not just Tysons, but beyond. She's really become an advocate for TDM in the suburban context. So having given you an introduction to both our panelists, I'm going to make sure Jim is back with us. Jim, are you there? I don't know, maybe Jim's on mute. Maybe we'll just do this a little out of order, Hillary, if you don't mind. Maybe we'll start with you talking about what happens after the tenant has decided to pick your location and why and how transportation plays a role for you as an owner in that context.
That's great. Thank you, Justin, for the introduction. I'm happy to jump in. In fact, what Jim was just saying before we lost him about Marriott's search for a transit-oriented mixed-use project that offered employees a place to walk and see things and do things during the day is exactly what we created. So it's kind of a good lead-in. So as Justin mentioned, my name is Hillary Zahm, and while I kind of wear a number of hats at Macerich, the hat I'm here to talk to you under today is as the transportation coordinator for the site. I want to give you a little bit of background on the site that I'm going to be discussing today, just in case you're not familiar with the Tysons Corner Center property. Tysons Corner Center is located west of Washington, D.C. We're a suburb in Tysons. It's between two of the region's major airports, National Airport and Dulles International Airport. And we're actually the largest shopping center in the region. The mall is a destination not only for local folks who use it as their regular shopping location, but also for tourists. And we actually welcome over 20 million guests or visitors each year. So I think in the past that number exceeded the Smithsonian. That may still be the case. For many years, the site was well served with an extensive regional and local bus network. And in July of 2014, Heavy rail was introduced to Tysons when the region's metro system extended through Tysons with stations on the newly designed and built Silver Line. On this graphic, you'll see the 4 stations in Tysons, and the one labeled as Tysons Corner is the one that's located just steps from our Tysons Corner Center site. Prior to rail, Tysons Corner had really just developed with mostly office and retail development. The governing jurisdiction, which in this case is Fairfax County, recognized that the arrival of rail would really support and benefit from a better, more balanced mix of uses, so they encouraged redevelopment of mixed-use projects. Macerich made the decision in an effort to integrate with the rail station in the future that we would obtain approval from the local jurisdiction and construct a mixed-use project that would include, as Justin discussed, an office tower, a residential tower, and hotel towers. And today I'll speak with you mostly about our efforts with the office tower, although we did do outreach for the residential, the hotel, and also the shopping center. So if someone is interested in that, I'm happy to discuss that at a later time. Our discussion today is really focusing on relocation efforts at the Phase 1 tower, which is labeled on this project as Tysons Tower in green. As I mentioned, it does have direct access to the Silver Line Metro station. You can see the little M symbol on the other side of the major road. We also have convenient access to the Beltway, which is labeled as 495 on the right side of the plan, as well as the high occupancy toll lanes that run along the Beltway. Those were constructed just a few years ago. So the building and the site are really both served very well by transit and high-capacity roadways. Our building is occupied with a number of tenants, and I'm primarily today going to talk with you about our efforts with our first tenant, but much of what we did for the lead tenant, we also carried forward with other tenants, and in fact still do some of this work today. So our transportation program at the shopping center and at the site in general is called Access Tysons. And as Justin mentioned, it is a transportation demand management program, or TDM program. Macerich oversees the program, and we coordinate with Wells & Associates as our consultant on implementation of our efforts. We began the program in 2007 as an effort to encourage our shopping center employees to find alternative ways of commuting to and from the site during rush hour. Just by way of background, the number of employees varies throughout the year, but in our busiest times, holidays and such, we can have up to 6,000 employees at the shopping center. So we're a pretty large draw in the region. While Phase 1 was under construction, we began to coordinate efforts to expand and adjust our program in order to accommodate not only the retail tenant employees, but also the needs of our future office residents, office employees, residents, and the hotel workers. As I mentioned previously, rail was not initially in Tysons. And in fact, when we had our first tenant preparing to arrive in Tysons, the arrival of rail was a little bit uncertain. And so we prepared for the arrival of our first tenant prior to the arrival of rail. And we were not sure how long that gap would last. We expected it to be potentially just a few months, but Metro had experienced some delays. So there was a bit of uncertainty. So this all kind of came at a difficult time because rail was delayed and the tenant was going to be arriving. Our lead tenant was relocating from Washington, D.C. in a very urban area with very easy transit access out to Tysons Corner, which at the time and still today is considered a suburb. However, it's much more urbanized today. Even just a few years ago, it was a different story. So for them, this was a big move, and their employees were going to be seriously changing their commutes, and so we had a lot of work to do. So Access Tysons offered the tenant a number of services. We conducted employee surveys to better understand the needs and fears of these tenants and of the employees. We actually had a 90% response rate from the employees that we contacted with this initial outreach. And 95% of those respondents indicated they were open to considering new transportation options to get to their new office. So a 90% response rate is really significant, and that really showed us that there was a lot of interest in the new commute and how they would handle it. There was also a high level of interest in carpooling based on the survey. So we held a carpool matching party and a relocation meeting with the tenants. We actually met with the tenants on a few occasions, coordinating with the human resources folks in the tenant's office. We helped create personalized commutes, which initially involved only buses before rail arrived, and then ultimately were able to transfer into transit routes with mass transit via heavy rail once rail arrived. We also provided an overview of the on-site amenities, and this is something that any office developer is going to do anyway, but we tried to provide this information in the context of commuting. So once folks knew there was a gym with a shower, there was a place to store bikes, they could then think about how would they commute to work and could that change based on those amenities. And of course, we encouraged folks to think about biking and walking to work and living even on the site since we were building a residential tower. We also fielded questions about which were the busiest days on the road so that the tenant could consider what days to encourage employees to telecommute. And we discussed the region's Smart Benefits program, which is Metro's program to put dollars on your Metro fare card for use getting to and from work. I do want to take a moment to discuss how the services we offer to our tenants benefited both us and the tenants. We feel pretty strongly that not only did the tenants benefit, but so did we. It allowed us to introduce the Access Tysons program to the tenants even before they stepped foot on the property and settled into their offices. So it gave them a really easy point of contact both prior to their move and then once they arrived. If they have any transportation questions, there's they know exactly who to call. There's never any concern. When we first reached out to tenants to offer these services and to discuss our efforts, they were immediately surprised and extremely grateful that we were offering this. I think on a number of occasions we had a few folks that said, this is free, we're not paying for this. I mean, they really were very surprised that we were offering these services to them. This is clearly something they hadn't seen in the past. And while tenants and employees were very excited about their new home and their new office space, it was very clear there were a lot of fears about traffic and commuting and the cost of commuting, especially for our lead tenant that was coming out of DC. Even though DC and Tysons are not that far away, in this region, traffic is of the utmost concern, and so people were really worried. Our goal was really to make sure that folks felt more comfortable with the transportation piece of their move. We wanted that to be manageable. We didn't want that to be an issue or a concern. So we really tried to provide the tools they needed in order to make the commute as simple and straightforward as possible. As I mentioned, transportation is really key in the DC area, as I'm sure it is in many of the areas where you all are working. People apply for jobs, accept jobs, or turn down jobs thinking about their commute because the traffic is so challenging. So we really wanted to make it a priority to reach out to tenants early on in the transition to show them that there are multiple options to get to Tysons, and you didn't just have to get into your car by yourself and sort of make your way on the road every day. There were a variety of options available. And so we worked with tenants prior to their moves, and then, like I said, we continue to support them even today if they have questions or concerns that pop up. So I'm going to wrap up now, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, and hopefully I didn't take too much of Jim's time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Hillary. That was perfect amount of time, actually. And we're going to move the slides backwards a little bit here and bring Jim back online. Jim, thanks for sticking with us here. We had some technical issues on our end and appreciate everybody's patience. We're right back where Jim left off on the methodology. And I know, Jim, you've been graciously on mute, and now we're ready for you. Back to Jim Young.
Well, let me start with, did any of our history come through when I got started? No.
It's probably best just to start from the beginning, Jim.
Okay. Well, we're a 90-year-old company. I think most people would recognize the name Marriott as the largest and leading lodging provider in the industry. We've been located all 90 years in the Washington, D.C. vicinity, and for the last 39 years, we've been located in a business park just outside of Washington, D.C. A couple of years ago, our senior leadership, Mr. Marriott, and our current CEO, Arnie Sorensen, began considering an upcoming lease expiration. And they contemplated the idea of, well, do we stay in this 40-year-old building and rehabilitate it and make it comfortable enough to spend another 20 years, or do we look at perhaps changing and relocating to a different area? One of the things that was important to our CEO was that the location itself be accessible on the metro line, and also to be in a vibrant urban environment where there were many amenities, as Justin was talking about. People could, one of the community where you could walk and live and work and play in the same vicinity. And so we began looking around, and at the time we conducted these traffic studies. We had 6 potential locations. And so we began using the tools that we had available, and if you'll see the methodology slide, to calculate the commute time for over 3,000 employees based on their home address. And the baseline was where we are currently located, but then we measured the commute difference between their home address and the potential locations that we were looking at. The decision to look at public transit, we used, again, similar tools to analyze whether there was an advantage, a positive advantage to using public transit, again, from the employee's current address to our current location, and then on the 6 test locations. We measured what the impact was, whether it was positive or negative, and we have a few small satellite offices, and we did not consolidate those employees into our study because those satellite offices would actually close when we moved into a new building, and we excluded any employees in the study that did not have legitimate home addresses, for example, if they had a post office box. So the next slide is simply a summary of the data that we were able to glean from these studies. The baseline was 32 minutes to our current location, and we learned that we had about 677 associates who were already traveling more than 45 minutes one way to and from work. The locations listed on the left were the contenders, if you will, and we were able to very quickly and easily see what the impact of those new locations, those new addresses, would be if we were to select any one of them. When analyzing the current commute, we discovered that many associates were already commuting between 15 and 30 minutes. Because of the geography of our area, with the Potomac River separating Maryland from Virginia and not having many bridges that cross that river, the majority of our associates lived in Maryland, north of our current location. About 20% lived in Virginia, and about 10% lived in Washington, D.C., or places south of our current location. And so this analysis helped us to see that, again, many people were commuting from less than 15 minutes to 30 minutes, but we had a fair amount that were traveling over 30 to 45 minutes and 45 to 60 minutes, and almost 300 people whose commute to our current location was, in fact, more than an hour. So what we learned was that the average commute time was 32 minutes. We had almost 700 people commuting more than 45 minutes. And we, in our model, did not have anybody riding public transportation. That was something that we looked at independent of the resources that were available to those who live close to public transportation. The particular site that we call it BETHESDA, which was eventually the site that we decided on, offered superior access to talent while adding only about 12 to 13 minutes for most Maryland commuters. Now, based on what we know and what the experts have told us about where talent is to be found, it's not necessarily in the suburbs north of or west of Bethesda, Maryland, or Washington, D.C. It's coming from the very urbanized areas in the city and in other pockets of population around and close to the city boundaries. And so we thought that given how important, as Hillary was saying, the commute is to people who are living in the Washington, D.C. area, that a 12 to 13 minute additional time added onto their commute was about as tolerable as we could allow, but it was acceptable. And here's just a graph that shows that overall the average commute time would increase. It would increase by 7 minutes on average, and that at least half of our population would find it continuing to be a tolerable commute. Here's again some important numbers that are represented by the analysis that we did. The average commute time went from 32 to 39 minutes. It was a 7-minute increase. There were 154 people who actually benefited, or their commutes got shorter as we moved our location 3 miles south. And our number of associates commuting more than 45 minutes did increase to 934. And we were able to determine that we currently had about 358 people taking public transportation, and that there were opportunities to increase those numbers. So in summary, we're at the point now where we're 4 years away from our actual move. And we think we've got plenty of time to change behavior and change the way people think. One of the things that we've just begun doing is a change management program. Many of the things Hillary mentioned, we're going to sit down and counsel with people. We're offering them commuting advice. We're getting them to think about those extra 7 to 12 minutes that they'll be driving, and whether we'll be subsidizing paid parking. It's free parking at the moment, always has been. That will be also a big change for our associates as they move. And we think that we're going to be, we'll benefit from having 4 years for people to begin to think about how their commutes will be changed. We actually have had some people already step forward and say, well, I'm moving. And some have made that decision to do that. That's how important their job is with Marriott and how they're going to deal with that commute. So thank you very much.
Jim, thank you. Great summary and insight into what goes into deciding where to locate a major headquarters for a major corporation. Right now, we're ready to take some questions. We acknowledge that we are at our half-hour limit. We said this is an express webinar, a 30-minute webinar, and we appreciate and acknowledge that it's running a little late, but for those of you that can stick around, we would love to field questions that you may have. So now's the opportunity for those of you that are still online and listening to go into that chat box and send us your questions. And while we're waiting for some of you to share your questions with us, I have a few that I'd like to share. And Jim, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you, and then I've got one for Hillary as well. So Jim, when the first question I have is, why did you decide that employee commute time by all modes of transportation was such an important factor in your headquarter location decision? I mean, clearly where you are now, you have people who are driving and people come to work, and some might say a big name like Marriott International will attract people no matter what they need to do. If they need to drive, they'll drive. But you guys, went away from that as a decision-making process. So what was behind that?
But, I think there was the answer. The essence of that answer was in a remark that Hillary made, that in this particular area, congestion and commuting difficulties have a heavy effect on employee wellness, and that accidents on Route 270 or the Beltway, or delays on bus lines or rail lines, it kind of ruin a person's day. And when they've spent 60 or many more minutes in traffic, it affects their productivity. It affects their attitude, and it really comes down to whether or not they're. I've told people, and people have told me that they really question whether working for Marriott is worth it if their commute went from an average of 45 minutes to an hour and a half, and that happens all too often.
Yeah, no doubt. Having the distinction of being the country's worst traffic plays into a lot of decision making, no doubt, and the quality of life is significantly impacted. Hillary, a question for you, and you kind of alluded to this, but when you made the decision to reach out to Intelsat at their site in DC months before they even moved to your property, why did you decide that you would meet them at their site in DC and not just wait for them to start moving into the building and talking with them then?
I think it really back to this issue of, in the DC metro area, people are sort of terrified of a worse commute, and relocating from DC, which is the urban core essentially, out to a suburb, and a suburb that, I didn't get into this, but kind of has a reputation for traffic. We wanted to allay those fears and address concerns early on. So by reaching out early, we had the opportunity not only to welcome our tenant before they even arrived, putting our best foot forward right from the get-go, but also reach points of contact with HR and employees, setting them up for a smooth transition, and establishing the relationship early on so that when questions do arise now that they're in the building, they already know who to contact. They already know where the website is. They know how to get transportation information, because we've already given all of that to them before they've even hit the ground. So it really was, we wanted to welcome them, bring them into the site, make them feel like they're part of our existing community, but also make sure they had the tools they needed to ensure that their employees knew how to get to and from the site without being afraid.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. Again, I think that's somewhat unique, and it shows, that you guys were going the extra mile to try and allay those fears as early as possible. It's a great example. Jim, just one last question for you. Mm-hmm. When you were deciding all of the different ways to prioritize modes of transportation, it's not just a matter of which modes of transportation, but looking at, when you're moving your headquarters, the employees of today, as well as the employees that you're going to be recruiting after we're all retired. So how did you prioritize the commuting needs of today's employees versus future employees and factor that into your decision making?
Well, we don't have a crystal ball, but we did try to look forward. And as you said, Justin, we recognize that as time marches on, those who are well tenured will be leaving the company, and will continue to attract candidates who are coming out of college or maybe coming off their first job out of college. And we paid a lot of attention to that. And we did our research on autonomous cars and other modes of transportation, and we really tried to, as much as we could, predict what things are going to be like 5 years from now, not how things are at the moment.
Sounds pretty close to a crystal ball to me, Jim, but when you would love to borrow it sometime. Hillary, one last question for you, and then we'll be wrapping up and talking about a few next steps. But the question for you is, given the experience you had with Intelsat, would you go through the same process again for another big tenant relocating to your facility?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is yes. I can't imagine a situation where we wouldn't. I mean, Intelsat was our lead tenant in the existing tower. They were a very important tenant because they were the major tenant and the lead tenant. And not only did we make this effort with them, but with all the other tenants as they came along. And I would expect when we build our next office tower at the site, we would do the same. I mean, I think we felt like it was outreach that was worthwhile. The cost and the effort was worth it. And so, yes, I would expect we would do it again.
Great to hear. I mean, sometimes, we experiment with different things and, we learn, that was okay, but wouldn't do it again. Good to know that that's something that's worth the investment on their part. Well, I'd like to thank both Jim and Hillary for their time and the great information that you guys shared today. Again, when we set out this webinar series, I don't think we were anticipating that probably a week or two before Amazon would be announcing its finalists for its headquarter relocations and make this even more relevant. But I think regardless of Amazon, as I mentioned earlier, this is a relevant topic, something that's constantly happening. And you both provided really great insight about the different perspectives, both the tenant, a major tenant, and as a property owner. So thank you both for the great information you shared today. To our audience, I just wanted to ask one more time, when you log out today, you'll see that there's a survey. If you could give us your feedback on the survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. We want to know how we can make this webinar series more relevant, both in terms of subject matter and the way we deliver content to you. Also, just a reminder, today's webinar will be available for download by close of business tomorrow, and you'll be getting an email with a link to that recording. And then finally, as you can see on the screen, just wanted to keep a little tickler for you for our upcoming webinars. We have next month bicycle amenities, which will have a focus on bike share in the suburbs. In March, we'll have more on information dissemination. April, public space programming. And in May, we'll be talking about wayfinding. So we hope you all join us next month, and looking forward to having further discussions with experts in the field as well as our audience. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.